Dallas Craft and the band, the Renegade Monks. Thank you, thank you. Oh, so this is the only service I ever sit, is for Ask the Minister. So there have been a number of questions that people actually have been approaching me one-on-one about, and I got their permission to share those questions here with you today. So the first question that came in is, we are interested in the story of how you became acquainted with the Unity community and then decided to become a Unity Reverend. So some of you already know this story, but some of you don't. So I went through a very dark night of the soul. Can anybody resonate with dark nights of the souls? Can I get an amen here? And it was a real dark night of the soul. And I had always been a spiritual person, but I was raised in conservative Orthodox Jewish community. Wanted to be a rabbi when I was 11 and was told that I couldn't because I was a girl. And then I realized I was queer, and that created a whole other dimension of challenges in a conservative Orthodox Jewish community. So art became my religion for a very long time. I was a professional actor, and that was where I felt the most connected. That was where I felt as if my sense of self would fall away, and I was connected in with something that felt bigger than myself, with the audience, with the people in the rehearsals, my fellow actors, that we were creating something together. And I was also studying basically all of the world's religions, trying to find the pieces that worked for me. And I felt like I was putting together a Frankenstein of spirituality that actually served me until it didn't. And I found New Thought. I started off with Centers for Spiritual Living in New York City. And I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. I'm not sure about this, but it was interesting. And they were doing a class, and I dove in. And then I came to visit one of a really good friend from college, and she was at CSL Oakland. And I went to visit her because she was in the choir and she was performing. And when you're an actor, anytime your friends perform, guess what you have to do? You have to go see them perform because you want them to come see you perform, right? It's reciprocity. So I went to go watch her perform in the choir. And I walked into this spiritual community that had banners down the sides for every faith religion there was. They had an LGBTQ plus flag. And it was around Yom Kippur, and they played a recording of a shofar being blown. And I just sat there and cried. And then the minister did this metaphysical interpretation of a Bible story that I'd always really had problems with, and made it relevant to my life. And that was it. I was hooked, right? I was hooked. I was like, oh, here's a place I can bring all of me to, not just part of me, but every part of me I can bring to this. And it's not just going to be accepted or tolerated, all those words, right? But actually welcomed, right? My uniqueness was welcomed as part of this, part of this teaching. And so I moved to Los Angeles so that I could be part of Agape, because Michael Beckwith really spoke to my heart. And I became a licensed practitioner there, and then moved to Princeton with my wife, because she had to move, and served at the CSL Princeton. And at the same time, I was doing an interfaith ministerial program, because Agape at the time didn't have, COVID hadn't happened yet, everybody. So there was no long-distance ministerial program where you could be anywhere and actually do it. So I became an ordained interfaith minister, moved back here to the Bay Area, and started going to spiritual centers to try to find our home. And we went to every single CSL in the area, and there's a lot of them. And it was really interesting because at every single one, my wife and I were completely ignored. Nobody spoke to us. Nobody said hello. And you know me, I'm not going to sit back and wait for somebody to say hello, right? So I'm trying to engage with people, and it felt like it was just this brick wall. And so we kept leaving and going, well, that's not it. Well, that's not it. Well, that's not it. One of them was only 4 blocks from our house. I was very upset that that wasn't it. And then I said, well, you know, there is a unity. Those are those Jesus people. That's what I told my wife. I said, but you know, it's Berkeley, so let's go try it. And we went, and from the minute we walked in the door, we were welcomed. We were brought in. We were held. They were without a minister at the time. Patricia Keel, who came from here, had founded that unity, and she had left, and they were without a minister, so I started guest speaking and teaching and then doing pastoral care, and then they actually hired me to be a minister for them, a part-time minister for them, and I realized that I loved this community. I love how open-hearted unity is. I love how everything really starts here in CSL, which I love too, don't get me wrong, but it can become very mental. It can be very cerebral. There are communities that do both. They bring the mind and they bring the heart. Agape was one of those places, but I found it to be kind of few and far between. And when I stepped into unity, I realized the heart is more important to me. I can do the mind stuff on my own. The heart piece I want to do in community. And so once I got hooked, and the region, all of the ministers in this region supported me so incredibly at Unity of Berkeley. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. And they just held me and supported me and guided me. And Ken Daigle and I met. And we met once at one of those ministerial meetings. We went out to the parking lot to get into our cars, and 3 hours later, we said goodbye and left. So he's like my brother from another mother. And so he was at Fremont at the time. So when he went to Unity of San Francisco, by then, Unity of Berkeley had closed. I midwifed it. I hospiced that community, which was beautiful and hard. And so I stepped in as associate minister at Unity San Francisco. And I really do believe that if you're going to serve a community, you need to be credentialed in that community, you know? So I became a licensed Unity teacher, and then I became a Unity minister. So that's how I came into the Unity world. I will say that I say this a lot, especially when I'm talking about affirmative prayer, but this teaching truly did save my life. That's not just, you know, what is that called? High rhetoric or hyperbole, thank you. It's not just hyperbole. Like literally this teaching saved my life and has continued to enrich and grow my life continually. So the next question I have is a doozy. I love it because all these questions are kind of doozies, but this one in particular. After Dr. Cindy Acker's talk, I've been thinking about the idea of justice in Unity World. What is it? A divine quality, capability, a power? Does it have an opposite? I imagine Charles and Myrtle Fillmore were in circumstances related to women's suffrage, or for Charles, the Indian reservation, customs and laws. Did they call on justice? I especially wonder about classic and current updated Unity perspectives. I love how Unity thinkers develop new thought and give credit to what has gone before. So I'm going to preface how I'm going to start this by saying I'm going to be doing some talks on this. Because as I did a deep dive, I was like, whoa. I mean, there is so much there. There's so much there. And I'm not going to kind of sugarcoat Unity's history either, right? Because we have to pay attention to what was in order for us to be able to evolve and grow so that we can show up in a way that is actually how we're meant to show up. So New Thought is considered to be part of the feminist movement. So that person mentioned the suffragette movement. And it is true that almost for the first, almost 7 years of Unity's existence as they were credentialing teachers and ministers, they were all women. Now, this is in the 1800s, right? So the fact that they were women ministers was huge and radical. Myrtle came from a very, very strict Methodist background, which she kind of distanced herself from. She went to Oberlin College, which was also very, very radical, that she actually went to college. Charles, his father left when he was 2, and so he was basically raised by his mom, and he actually learned reading and writing and all of critical thinking from a woman in town who had also gone to college, very rare at the time, and she mentored him, taught him how to read, how to write, how to think critically. So Charles was always really surrounded by very, very strong women. So there was that energy certainly going on within Unity, but I will say this, while Myrtle and Charles were building Unity, it was Charles's mother that was taking care of the kids in the family. Myrtle became a teacher, and Unity started off as a teaching organization. That was its roots. It wasn't set out to become what it is today. It was originally a teaching organization. So how radical was Myrtle in her time if all of her education and everything is going into teaching? It was a more accepted avenue for women to be able to step into that particular field. And at the same time, she was still pretty radical, but I don't think she would have called herself radical, right? Nowhere in any of the readings can we find her saying that she's a suffragette or anything like that. It's really more about how she was showing up and making space for women to be able to stand in their spiritual authority. Now think about that. That is also radical when you think about the times, that women, along with men, could stand in their spiritual authority. So this idea of justice, there's lots of, they don't write much about it, I'm sad to say. The idea of social justice is a relatively new concept. So that wouldn't have even been part of their vernacular, right? That wouldn't even have been part of what they understand. For them, justice is a divine quality. So it is a principle. And that principle arises from our prime principle, the principle of oneness. And the next principle that they kind of link justice to is equity. So one power, one presence. If we are all it, then there is nothing and no one who is better or more or greater or more elevated than anyone else. So can you feel how out of that prime principle, equity and equality can be one of those, it becomes something we can kind of get a handle on. And relating to equity is justice, along with wisdom and discernment. They looked at this idea as being something that required us to bring a lot of different powers and principles into play, right? So Myrtle says this, it's the only thing I could find about justice in all the research I was doing. So equity is found in the writings associated with lists of other principles. It is closely associated with justice, judgment, wisdom, and discernment. Equity and/or justice are the principles underwriting the law of giving and receiving and the law of reaping and sowing. What we put out from consciousness is reinforced in our own consciousness. There is equity in this. Just to the extent that people try to claim anything as their personal property, so do they wander away from God, the principle of benevolence, equity, love, truth, justice, and harmony. So everyone follow that? Because the biggest challenge, and this takes me to my next question, which is how do we hold abundance in a world where children are starving in Gaza? And not just starving in Gaza, right? I mean, we have children starving right here in Marin County. We have children starving literally in our backyards. We have people unhoused. We have so much in this world, right? And so what Myrtle is saying is that if all of our focus is placed on material ends, and we would call this profit, right? That I want to get as much as I can for as little as possible, that we are completely missing the mark as to how we are being invited to show up, because that is not about equity. Can you feel that? If we're trying to get as much as we can for as little as possible, right there, it is not equitable. And so Myrtle goes on to say, you can make equity and justice between yourself and others the central theme of all your saying and doing. Never for a moment allow yourself to entertain any scheme for getting the better of your fellows in any trade or bargain. Hold steadily to the law of equity and justice, knowing for a certainty that you are already supplied with everything necessary. Give full value for everything you get. Demand the same for everything you give. But do not try to enforce this through human means. So there's always this tension in Unity where we live in this experience in time and in space, and is this a messy world that we live in? This is a heartbreaking world that we live in. And it's also an incredibly inspiring and beautiful and majestic world that we live in. It's all of these things at once. And so what Unity is constantly, and not just Unity, let me be really clear, this is all of the mystical teachings of all the faith traditions are saying you are more than what you are in time and space. There is something more than just what is right in front of you that you are being invited to live into and to activate. This teaching has been around for over 100 years. Are we doing it? Maybe. Maybe we've started to put a little crack in something as more and more people sort of step into an awareness that there's something else that we're being invited to. But the real piece is that we are being invited to be changed ourselves. That the work that we're doing here in Unity is about us being able to show up with more love and more compassion, with an understanding of that spiritual capacity that is available to everyone. And that as we engage in that, we need to change the world. And that's not easy. There's systems in place. There are systems in place that have been designed to make some people profit while other people don't. And it's going to ask a lot of all of us to be able to shift that energy and that dynamic. I was reading, this is all my notes, right? So I'm not going to do all of this, but James Trapp says something. He was the president of Unity at one point, and he's located in Sacramento. And he says, universal spiritual teachings can help us live out this truth and help us move to being a fair and just society for all who are a part of it. And so we may ask, how do these teachings help do that? It's a question worth contemplating if we are to create a world in which the cancerous energy of hate no longer exists. And we are to have a world in which everyone, absolutely everyone, regardless of origin, nationality, citizenship, status, race, culture, religious, I would add sexual orientation or identity, is treated as the wonderful being of God that we all are. It begins with each one of us. And then Kathy Beasley goes on to say, The words of the teaching are just that, words. And they will always be words until there's a systemic shift from words to a more consistent practice in our world, or nothing's ever going to change. The unity teachings have to become just words, that invitational language of justice seeking. Our unity teachings have to become the bellwether of compassionate response to the global distress call. This is what we're being invited into. And so there is a tension as there are children starving in Gaza, and how do we hold this idea of abundance? And as I was reading Unity's foundational teachings around all of this, you can feel the privilege just wafting off those pages, right? Such an incredible amount of privilege just coming off those pages. So this is where we get to do this work. This is our part in this. Unity's teachings are always growing and evolving. What I am teaching you now has all of the foundational components that Charles and Myrtle and Emma Curtis Hopkins and all those great foundational teachers were speaking to, and we have evolved. Thank goodness. So this is the next evolution. How do we honestly and authentically hold the concept of abundance in a world where people don't have enough? And one of the things I do want to say is that I found this statistic, which I thought was pretty interesting, that every year, this is from 2022, every year 9 million people starve to death globally. Just take a breath. 9 million people starve to death globally. Simultaneously, in the United States alone, 80 billion pounds of food are thrown away each year. Experts on hunger have come to a clear consensus that enough food is produced to feed everyone on the planet. But there are systems in place that prevent that from happening. You don't make a profit if you have to take your food from here in Marin and get it somehow to Arkansas. That actually costs you money. So instead of doing that, they throw it away. We have systems in place where entire countries, their entire ecosystem has been turned over to just producing one crop. Sugarcane, pineapples, bananas. And so those people living in that area have no other food options because that's the system that is in place. So this is where we are being invited to know the abundance, because it's there. We actually have enough food to feed this planet. And what we're being invited into is, how do we dismantle the systems that are human? The systems are not divinely ordained, right? Everyone breathe into that with me, right? They are not divinely ordained. It's a bunch of people sitting around saying, I want more, and I don't care what happens to the rest of the planet because I still want more. So we are being invited to be the anchor for something true, for something real. And as Ernest Holmes says, he says, where's my Ernest Holmes quote? This is what happens when you have so many pieces of paper. You're like, what? He says, echoing the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., you and I should form the habit of taking definite time each day to contemplate and affirm peace with justice. For there is no peace possible without justice. But faith without works is dead. We should not only pray, we should act, each contributing the best that they have to the common purpose, each willing to make what seems to be a sacrifice necessary. There can be no individual self-preservation without the preservation of all. So this is what we're being invited to actually own and live into. Words are just words until we actually activate them, right? And that's our practice. How do we actually live into that? What does that actually mean for us individually, as a community? How are we being called to understand that our own personal self-preservation means nothing if we are not focused on the preservation of all beings? Because we come back to our prime principle: one power, one presence. We're not separate. I know it can feel that way as we sort of live in this country that has so much. But we are not separate from those 90 million people. Was it 90? How many people die from starvation? 9. Yeah, let's not inflate those numbers, Deanne. 9 million people. We're not separate from them. Oh, good stuff, huh? These are deep questions, so I'm going to keep coming back to these because I can't do this all in one thing. The last 2 questions that I have are about, I was meditating this morning and I was really stuck on the people that I don't necessarily like. In other words, how do I interact lovingly, which I equate with warmly, when I don't necessarily like them? I love them in the general sense, but the warmth isn't really there. Maybe it's a sense of guardedness, and I equate that with lack of warmth. Is that the human part of me? That's a great question. Anybody in here relate to that? We get stuck and fixated on the people we don't like. I loved this person's sort of self-awareness. I thought was really interesting, right? Because they said maybe it's a sense of guardedness. And yeah, I would say any time that we are shutting ourselves down from the truth of the oneness that truly is, anytime we are more fixated on the humanness of someone rather than the divinity that they are, see, look at me, I want to get out of my chair already, then we know that on some level we're trying to protect ourselves. It's not actually about the other person. It's about ourselves. It's about that we don't want to get hurt, or we don't necessarily trust that they're going to care for us, right? And so we have a guardedness around that. So part of our work is to look at those places where we think that it's other people's responsibility to meet all of our needs, number 1, right? All that quantum living work that we do. And number 2, we also just want to pay attention to the idea that, they're there to help you practice. They're actually your best friend right now. Because they are, like the dogs barking behind Cindy, those were her best friends. Because she was being invited to not let them interfere with the truth of where she was, in her wholeness, in her awareness. So the people who show up in our life that are the lightning rods for all of our own reactivity, my practice is to just thank them over and over and over again, right? Thank you. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for showing me this part of me that I need to grow past. Thank you for allowing me to expand what it means to love, right? To be more and never less than who I truly am. And then the last question was, I found this prayer, and something about it felt a bit off to me after the book study on affirmative prayer, which I loved, by the way. I want a prayer for a romantic partner that I can work with on a regular basis. How do I rewrite this? So the prayer that they found was, I am a radiating center of divine love, and the right and perfect romantic partner is being mightily attracted to me now. I give thanks for the immediate, complete, divine fulfillment of these desires. This or something better comes forth with perfect timing according to God's rich good for me. This was a unity prayer, too. So the part that really stood out to me is a perfect romantic partner is being mightily attracted to me right now. How could that possibly be true? Like, I'm sitting here saying, I want a romantic partner, and there's someone somewhere kind of goes, oh, I need to go find Deanne because I'm mightily attracted to be with her right now. So we remember that affirmative prayer isn't to control or manipulate or create or choose for other people what it is that they are doing in this world. I mean, it almost sounds like witchcraft, right? I'm going to cast a love spell over that person, and it doesn't matter whether they actually want to be attracted to me or not, they're going to be. So I worked with this person, right, on how to modify this prayer so that, remember, because affirmative prayer inspires us to be our own, to stand in our own spiritual authority. Who's being changed in affirmative prayer? We are. Not that poor schmo who all of a sudden looks up and says, oh, I need to go find a romantic relationship, right? So what we changed it to was this. In this moment, I open my heart to a new perspective about attracting the right and perfect romantic partner. I let go of where I have been and open to what is possible. I recognize there is only one power, one presence, and it is love. I am the living expression of love. Love is everywhere present. As love, I am the power of attraction. I can attract the right and perfect romantic partner. Notice how we're not expecting someone else to do something? I release any belief that they are not available to me. As love, I focus on the possibilities ahead. I envision the perfect romantic partner. I say yes to all the ways I am asked to shift and show up differently. I say yes to living as this power of love in all my interactions. How grateful I am for spiritual insight and a fresh perspective based in the truth that I am love. I celebrate the fullness of life right now. I look ahead in joyful anticipation as I attract the right and perfect romantic partner. Can you feel the difference? Right? So one of them is about self-empowerment. The other one is what I would call magical thinking. Right? Magical thinking. It's thinking that somewhere someone is going to wake up and realize that they need to come and find me, specifically me. Right? And that's not to say that there isn't something bigger than us that's in action. Yes? Can everybody hear that? I am not personally creating this. What I am doing is becoming the perfect space for the right and perfect partner. So that if I were to meet them, I would actually be open to it. I would actually perhaps see it. I often tell people that if somebody had told me that they were going to set me up on a blind date with my wife, Chris, I would have said, are you out of your mind? There's no way we're going to get along. She was French, she smoked, right? She was a scientist, she's an introvert, and she lived in friggin' France. Why would that in any way, shape, or form make any sense to step into some sort of long-term relationship? But do you see how if the mind becomes involved, we're shutting down possibilities? Because the minute I met her, I knew I was in trouble. And the minute I met her, I knew my life was never going to be the same. We communicated with a French-English dictionary because I barely knew any French and she barely knew any English. Right? So the mind would have said, there's no way that could actually happen. But we have our 20th anniversary this year. So the invitation is just to remember that we are the ones who are being changed. And it is through our shift in understanding that everything shifts. Because remember, there's only one power and one presence. So all of a sudden, I might decide that I'm going to go to some event. Or like Chris decided to come to the club that night where she met me. She didn't have to decide that. It was her choice. There was no magic woo-woo that was, forcing her to get out of that house and come down to the club. We all have the capacity to choose. Everyone breathe with me on that. We can choose. And if we don't like what's happening in our life, what do? Choose again, right? We pivot. We choose again. So let's take all of this into our time of meditation. Oh, look, there was my pretty slide. My wife is not feeling well today, so I'm doing all the slides, so bear with me. So I know that was a lot. So let's just breathe into whatever might be useful for you right now, right? Each of us. Maybe it's a different awareness of how we're being invited to change. Maybe it's the very confusing and don't really have an answer, but only a glimpse of what might be possible around these issues of social justice. Breathing into that space, that place that is quiet and still. And it's from this place that all things are possible. It's from this place that we truly can heal the world. As we show up in a new way, as we are willing to let go, we invite a new understanding, not just within ourselves, but everywhere simultaneously. Whether it's a romantic partner, whether it's the end of systemic racism, whether it's finding peace with the people who we know aren't necessarily the people we want to be the best friends with. All of it, those children in Gaza, the children here in Marin, we are large enough to hold it all. And so let's just rest here for a moment or two as we listen. Just listen for what it is that we know is possible within ourselves that maybe we didn't know before. Let's rest here in the silence. How good it is to be still and know that out of seeming no way, that from this spiritual understanding, a way is made. That we are 100% human and 100% divine simultaneously. And we are being invited to be the place and space where we live fully as that integrated divine human. And in our unique gifts, talents, perspective, our lives and the entire life of this world is changed. In gratitude for this and so much more, I do give thanks. For the yes, for the willingness to be in the hard spaces, to allow ourselves to be courageous and to not look away from what makes us uncomfortable. Always knowing that this space is the answer to every and any question. And so it is. Amen. Ashe.